Hello and good afternoon and welcome to this masterclass from SKEMA Business School on Managing in International Contexts, the Multicultural Challenge. So we will be having an exchange this afternoon about some of the multicultural aspects that you will be facing during your studies and also in your career life. In order to let you know who I am, just a few words about myself. So my name is Anke Middelmann, and I'm a professor at SKEMA Business School, where I teach multicultural management in many different programs and where I also run the Global Executive MBA. Now, my interest in multicultural matters started at a very early age because I am German on paper, but I have spent most of my life outside of my home country. In England, as you can hear, in Belgium, in the United States, and now in France, where I've lived for nearly 16 years. And the multicultural aspect is something that's accompanied me throughout my life. And it's been of such interest to me that I actually decided that a career in this would be wonderful in terms of helping people from different cultures better understand each other and work together more effectively. And so SKEMA is an ideal place to do this. As you know, we are a very global school. We have campuses around the world and international students from all over the world who come to our various campuses as well. So this afternoon, what I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about some of the multicultural aspects that you will be experiencing during your courses at SKEMA, in your studies, in your trips to foreign campuses, but also as preparation for your professional life afterwards. And this is something that is becoming very, very crucial. So let's just take a little look at the backdrop in which I'm teaching, you're studying, and we will probably meet at some point. So you will find that the context of 21st century management is very much going to be global. There are many close and interlinked challenges and implications for managers today, but also in the future. And this is, of course, something that we're preparing you for. Now, you're in an environment where technological progress is already fast, and it's only going to get faster. Digitalization has already transformed how we live and work, and it's going to continue doing that. There are demographic changes which are creating shifts around the world that are creating social and economic inequalities. And as though that weren't enough, we will also need to balance environmental issues on a global level. So many, many things have to be addressed. And against all of this backdrop, globalization is something that is very much here to stay. And so for us, it is very important to ensure that you will be able to manage across cultures effectively, both as students, but also in your professional lives afterwards, because this will intensify. Maybe not face to face, but as we have seen with the current crisis or the recent crisis, globalization isn't stopped, but it has moved online. Now, there is something I forgot to say in my introduction. You hear that I'm doing this in English, and because I believe that it is something that is very global. I would like you, however, to be able to communicate with me in terms of questions, comments after this presentation as much as possible. And of course, you will be able to ask questions in French, and I will be able to reply in French with an accent. So now that we've seen the backdrop, let's see what we're actually going to be talking about when we talk about culture and multicultural. So when we speak about culture, what do we actually mean? It's a very, very fuzzy term, and it could mean many different things. So I'm going to show you some of the research that has been done about culture and about multicultural issues to give you a flavor of what you will be experience in classes, in your semesters abroad, on our campuses or on exchanges, because this is going to be a very central component to what you will experience. So let's define culture. It's not easy. Now, as you can see, people have tried to do this for a long time. Sir Edward Burnett Taylor was one of the first who actually came up with a definition of culture. And as you can see, it includes many things: knowledge, beliefs, art, laws and morals, and any other things, capabilities and habits that man has produced and acquired during his or her life. Gerd Hofstede, who was one of the most preeminent scholars and researchers in the field of cross-cultural communication and management, defines culture as the collective mental programming of the human mind. So it's a little bit like we all have computers that look very much the same, but inside we all have different softwares. And so our computers distinguish themselves from each other, just like people within certain groups will distinguish themselves from people in other groups. And a very nice and very unacademic definition of culture could be, hey, it's how we do things around here. Now, when we think about what composes culture, you can see that in the word bubble on the right, there are very many different elements that will constitute culture. And we're going to take this today very much as a mindset to be acquired, a multicultural mindset. And I'm going to try and show you through illustrations and explanations how we can visualize this fuzzy concept and better understand it, understand where the challenges might be, and also give you some tips on how they can be overcome, and how this is also part of SKEMA's global approach to help you make the most of this multicultural adventure. So the concept of culture can actually be understood in a less fuzzy way. So Edward T. Hall, who was an American anthropologist who studied different cultures very closely, designed this illustration of an iceberg. And he noticed that there are certain things that are easy to see. It's all the visible culture. Music and language. We can hear different language. We speak different languages. We can see how people communicate through their gestures. We see that fashions are different around the world, that people eat different foods and they eat foods differently, and maybe at different times as well. Now, he called all of this objective culture because it's partly objects that were being formed. And it's objective because it's something that you take in with your senses, with your hearing, with your eyesight, through smell, through touch, and also, of course, through speech. So these are important elements of culture, but it gets much more interesting because Edward Hall said that the culture that we see is actually developed from mindsets, ideas, and beliefs that we cannot see and we do not see. And so he said that values, beliefs, and assumptions form the way we live, work, act, etc. Now, he said that these beliefs, beliefs and values are the deepest thing when we talk about culture. They are very deep. And often we don't know what our values are because they are so long-standing and they get passed from one generation to another that we don't ask ourselves questions. But when we grow up, we're taught that this is right and this is wrong. This is good and this is bad. This is how you should do it. This is what it means to be polite. Okay, and this is something that happens to cultures around the world. But because they come from different conditions and from different mindsets, they will have different behaviors and they will consider different things to be respectful and polite from one's own. So these beliefs have really influence many things. They influence how we view relationships, for example, and those can be relationships in a family, between men and women, between children and their parents, between people in an organization, between bosses and subordinates. At every level of an interpersonal relationship, there is some cultural value attached. And the same is true in a more societal sense as well. Another really key element that he identified was that of time. People around the world have the same number of hours in a day, but they use those hours differently. How should we be working? How should we be active during those 24 hours? What is really important? Is it work? Is it being with family? These are things that are often very culturally based. More practically and pragmatically, culture also impacts on decision making. Who makes a decision? And what decision do they make, or can they make? What processes do we put in place? How do we deal with risk? These are all things that are very culturally bounded. And of course, aesthetics and beauty is something else that is key. There is beauty and aesthetics in every culture, but it is valued in different ways and for different reasons. Now, we come on to something very important, which is the foundation to your multicultural journey. This means, so these things are subjective, and it means that we do not see them in an objective way. We've been taught that certain things are better than others, and so we cannot be objective. So what happens is that our culture is something that we learn from birth. We're not born with it. We learn it through our parents, friends, teachers, families, television, the press. It comes from very deep roots. Remember who taught you your table manners? It was probably your parents or grandparents. And because they tell us, we think it's right. Now, the thing is, once we've mastered those rules, they become unconscious. We don't think about them anymore, we just do them, and they become very normal to us. But it means also that we have absorbed something that we think is right, which means that our culture, that our views are inevitably influenced by a cultural lens. And so we see everything in some way that may not be shared by everybody else. And a beautiful quote, which is one of my favorites when it comes to multicultural management, is this one by Anais Nin, which says that we never see things as they are, i.e. objectively, but we see them as we are. So whatever we do, we see it with our lens. Now, this of course is fine when you are in your home environment, in your environment in which you've always been, because people tend to have very much the same or similar points of view, behaviors, and values. But what happens when we meet other cultures? Now, remember I had talked about the iceberg. Well, think about this. Two icebergs coming together. Icebergs never meet at the top. They never really meet in the objective, visible cultural part, but they meet at the bottom. And look how frothy and busy and active these two icebergs that are coming together are. It means that there is a clash, a crash of things coming together. And those might be cultural differences that are not in agreement with each other, not in a harmonious coming together. And we sometimes talk about culture clash. And this is something that can happen at many, many levels. Now, you're going to tell me, well, we've been a global world for quite some time. Shouldn't we know better by now? We've been, doing business around the world. We have met people from many different cultures. We have traveled a lot. And yes, you're absolutely right. But there are challenges and obstacles to becoming really effective and to avoiding so much crashing ice. The first one is that we often assume similarity. I'm going to give you an example of this, which is the example of Walmart. This is as we know, this is a company in the United States that has done business very successfully there and wanted to buy up companies, bought up a German supermarket in a long time ago, a big low-cost chain, thinking, well, you know, we're doing the same thing, we have the same you know, low-cost products, what can go wrong? Well, a lot of things went wrong. And in fact, Walmart sold the German company not very long after because they couldn't see eye to eye, because the German employees found that the organizational culture at Walmart was not something that they could deal with. So then Walmart said, well, you know, we'll buy up or we'll do business with in Japan, and they joined forces with a Japanese supermarket chain, and there it didn't work because actually the Japanese consumers were not happy about products that were sold as cheap, because for them cheap meant low quality, not a bargain. So you can see how different cultural assumptions actually caused quite a culture clash. And that's at the level of a big business. But it trickles down to more individual things as well, but they can cause just as much of a problem. So, for example, culture is deeply ingrained, as we've said before, and we tend to unconsciously have a bias, which means we unconsciously have a preference for one thing over another. Now, because of this bias, what we do sometimes do is that we can easily form stereotypical or generalized ideas about people from other cultures or aspects of other cultures. And sometimes we even make judgments about them before we know everything about them. Now, this can obviously be quite detrimental to friendships, to business operations, to comments in the press, at all levels. And so, you know, if we're not conscious about unconscious bias, it can become quite problematic. Another element is the fact, again, it's our lenses, that we see from one specific perspective. And, you know, it's not so easy to change that perspective. Now, I'm going to show you a picture, and you may see one of two things. You may either see a duck with its beak or the head of a rabbit with his ears. But there is one thing you see first, and sometimes it's very difficult to switch that perspective to see something different. And this is exactly what multicultural competence requires you to do, that you manage to switch your perspective and the way you look at things. Now, to be quite honest, I tend to see a duck first. And sometimes I have to look at it for quite a long time, and I have to have somebody tell me that actually one could also see a rabbit in it. So remember, those things about mindset and perspective are very important. The other thing that I'm sure some of you've already faced, if you have international experience, is that communication is so different everywhere around the world, both in terms of verbal and non-verbal communication. Now, verbal communication can be language and how loud we speak and those sorts of things. The non-verbal communication can be even more challenging to get right across cultures. For example, look at this picture here. Non-verbal communication is different across cultures. Both of these people want to be polite to each other, but it's difficult because they're actually doing two very different things in terms of being polite. And I have to tell you from my own experience, coming from Britain to France and having lived in the United States before that, I found it very difficult to navigate my way through French greeting etiquette. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out whether it was a handshake or whether it was even la bise. And then, you know, should somebody be addressed with vous or tu? That was all quite difficult. The way I managed to get over that was that I decided to step back and to let other people come towards me so that I would then do the right thing. And you have to listen very carefully as well. But again, these are big challenges. You will see that there are others which are in terms of people's personal space. People tend to have a private, a personal space, a more public space, and a social space. And depending on who they are with, they will let people get closer to them or not. And in some cultures, there is a very small space bubble. In others, there's a much larger one. And those are things that we see, but in order to get them right, that's quite challenging. But you can imagine how in business encounters where maybe both people aren't so multiculturally competent, this can cause a real challenge. And another nonverbal expression would be this idea of how you express your feelings through just in terms of how you look and how you react to something without words. These illustrations, which you can find on the internet, are from a Chinese artist who grew up in Germany, and she did a contrast, a cross-cultural contrast of the German approach in the blue and the Chinese approach in the red. So if a German, in her case, is unhappy, they will show it. A Chinese person may be unhappy in their mind, but they may not show it. And so if the people are not competent culturally, the German may think that actually his Chinese counterpart is really quite happy, which may not be the case at all. So you can see the stumbling blocks are really quite big at all levels. And I could tell you stories and anecdotes for hours, but we don't have the time. But you know, another time. So if it's so difficult, what can you do? Well, this is where your multicultural adventure and your journey starts. And at SKEMA, we do place quite a lot of emphasis on precisely this aspect. We want you to be able to benefit from our global openness because we realize that, you know, doing business globally is really important. But this is one of the things that you're going to have to master. And it forms part of your whole learning curve. It's like a red thread throughout your programs. So, well, the first thing to do is that, and I've said this before, it's all a matter of perspective and mindset. And in order to be successful in a cross-cultural, multicultural context, we need to develop a new lens through which to see things. And I really like this quote from Marcel Proust, who said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new places, but in having new eyes. If you seek new places without new eyes, you risk missing out on an awful lot of cultural wealth, of encounters with people, of learning for yourself, learning about yourself. And so this new lens, this change of frame is going to be very, very important. Now, one of the things that I have often found in my career is that people are very keen to learn about other cultures, and that's great. At the same time, every cultural encounter or cross-cultural encounter has at least two cultures in it. The culture of the two people involved in it. And it's okay to understand about another culture, but in order to reframe and to see it through an objective perspective that doesn't leave room for judgments and negative appreciation, it's also very important to understand your own culture and your own background, because the other person will also have assumptions and ideas and reflections about you and your culture. So for me, what's actually quite important is not only to learn about others, but also about ourselves, and actually to start that journey with ourselves. So since we're in a a French context, I'm going to show you a little bit of research that's been done about the different cultures of our of the campuses on which we are. Now, these aren't the only cultures that you'll meet, of course, during your stay at SKEMA, because you will be in international classrooms with cultures with people from all over the world and different cultures. So it would be a much richer discussion, but it's not something that we can go into at that depth at the moment. So here we go. Here is what a company called Cultural Detective found out when they did research on values. And they did this on the values of many different parts of the world. And this is the lens, the French value lens. As you can see, it's quite busy. There's a lot of stuff going on there. There are certain things that are very complementary, and then there are things that are very contradictory. For example, if we take equality and power and hierarchy, those seem to be opposites. Relationships are important, and but also reserve and formality. So you can probably think of all sorts of examples in the tip of the iceberg where you can say, ah, yes, of course. Now I can see the relationship importance in a French context, or, ah, yes, the anti-conformisme, I can see that, and débrouillardise, I can see that. So, okay, it might be a French cultural thing. Now, that's also great. But if you're going to try and really understand your culture and other cultures, you need to go further, and you need to see, where does that come from? Now, culture does change a little bit, but many things, as we've seen before, don't. What's in the lens is right at the bottom of a typical French iceberg. In order to understand where that comes from, it's important to actually see how history and religious belief systems and philosophy have influenced the mindset. Now, I've given you some of the things that for me are quite key in explaining certain aspects of this French cultural lens. For example, we can go right back to the ancient Greeks, because that's where the ideas of democracy, of liberty, equality, that's where those came from. We have the French Revolution, we have the before and the after of the French Revolution that I think are quite key to explaining certain aspects of French culture today. And something that is very fundamental to the belief system as well, and this is the case not just in France but all over the world, is the idea of religious beliefs. It doesn't mean that you have to go to church every Sunday or you are a practicing believer, but there are certain values and ideas propagated by religions and religious movements all over the world that have had a real impact in defining how society values certain things over others. And then I have to tell you, when I first moved to France, I found out about René Descartes, and he's become my best French friend. He has helped me to explain a lot about the Cartesian logic. So these are very specific to a French context. And if you understand those, then you will see with what lens you might approach other cultures. Now let's move on. Let's say, as part of your program at SKEMA, you might want to go to Brazil. Now, Brazil has a very different lens. There are certain things that are the same. For example, the hierarchy and the relationships are also in the French lens. However, we have to remember that the Brazilian context, its background, its history, its geography is fundamentally different. And so relationships will be expressed differently, and so will hierarchy. In order to understand why things are done in certain ways in Brazil, you've got to go back and start with the Portuguese. The Portuguese settled Brazil, discovered and settled Brazil in the year 1500. So it's a much younger culture than France, but it's formed its own value lens based on what happened then. The Portuguese found a land that was huge, that had incredible natural resources, and they set about exploiting it. But they ran this country from Portugal, from Lisbon, rather than Brazil. So they were like an absentee landlord. And so this is something important as well. And Brazil is many times bigger than Portugal. So it's quite a different relationship than we've had with the French lens. Again, Christianity comes into play in a big way in Brazil, as does the issue of slavery. You know that Portugal had a very active slave trade, and even today about half of the Brazilian population can trace their roots to slaves that were brought to the country by the Portuguese. Now you see, this is a combination that will give you a very different picture of that society. There will be very different ways of seeing the hierarchy. You know, the way that people relate to each other, the kind of communities they form. It's very different from a French context. Everybody is an immigrant in some way, has come to this country from somewhere else. They haven't been there for hundreds of years or thousands of years even. And say after Brazil, you want to go to China. So China is very different. China has a very different set of influences. And again, you see things like hierarchy, like relationships in this lens, the same as France, the same as Brazil. But the background context is completely different. And if you don't understand that, then you will be lost in China. If you assume that the hierarchy and the relationships are the same in all three countries that we've talked about, well, you know, it's going to be problematic. Because in China, this is a culture that goes way back. It is one of the only cultures in the world to have a homogeneous cultural development over 4,500 years. You know, in Europe, we think we've got lots of old culture going on, but it's nothing by comparison. Confucius lived at about the same time as the Greek philosophers, but came up with a very different philosophy to how to create societies. Rather than a democracy and individual equality and individual development, Confucius advocated a society based on a very well-defined social structure in which everybody had their rightful place. And this is something that, while changing in the mindset, it is still there today. And so, again, issues of hierarchy will be presented completely different. And at the center of the Confucian system is this notion of the family. And so you can see that family has its own little piece of pie in this lens. This is, for me, one of the other crucial elements to understand the yin and the yang. It's a symbol that's known all over the world, but it's a symbol which is all about balance. It's not going from, you don't stay in one extreme or another extreme, you try to find a middle way. And if you look at the lens and you see harmony, you understand that it's harmony of nature, it's harmony of relationships, it's harmony in keeping with the way life flows. And the thing is that this balance is something that needs to be created throughout one's life. And so prosperity is something that is not an end in itself, but prosperity is something that you try to pursue throughout your whole life. And finally, Buddhism is another really important influence in China. Again, you see that it's a very circular symbol and a very different idea on the path of fulfillment, on the path to overcoming pain and to having a fulfilled life. There was a lot of research around Western and Eastern ways of thinking and doing and working, and these fundamentals are something that are absolutely present. You can make the link between working practices today to how things were about to the ideas developed 2,500, 4,000 years ago. And finally, you might decide that you're going to go to Raleigh. And so here we go. Here's another lens for you. Now, this lens is great because it's got very few words in it. It's very direct. It's very to the point. No messing around. So you tell it like it is, and it's up to you. You take charge. Now, this American lens, obviously, we have to take into consideration that there are many different cultures in the United States today, and it's very difficult to draw up one lens that would satisfy everybody. And the same is true in many, many countries. However, these are some of the core values and the ones that are embraced by many of the people that have come to the United States. Without understanding what the Pilgrims brought in the early 1600s, you're not going anywhere. You need to understand that the pioneer spirit is hugely important. These were people who came for the American dream, who came, and still today, from areas that were poorer, where they didn't have enough to eat, where they were never going to get anywhere in life. And so they would take the risk to start completely new. And they knew that they had to take charge of their own destiny and that it was up to them. And that they couldn't do it any other way, that they couldn't necessarily rely on other people to do it for them. It also meant that there was very little hierarchy because everybody was in competition with everybody else, but everybody went for those same reasons. And immigration is something, obviously, that has been going on in the States for forever. So it's a very multicultural melting pot, but everybody came for very much those same reasons. Of course, another big component in American development that is important to understand is, and this is a picture of the American Civil War of the 1860s, is that this is something that has very much defined the United States of today, and of course also in very, very recent times. And so if you understand some of those backgrounds, it will help you better understand that lens. For example, tell it like it is means, you know, don't put things into beautiful words. You just say what you mean. And that's come about because if you think about it, when people come from all these different parts of the world with different languages, with different expressions, with different meanings, they had to go to basics. Most of them probably didn't speak English when they first arrived, so everything became very basic and simple so that people could communicate. And it is one way of making everybody quite equal as well. And it's led to this direct communication style for which we know the United States today. So in short, you do need to sort of learn a little bit about these different cultures so that you can muddle your way through when you get there. So there's a little bit of background there. There's a lot of research that's been done about different cultures. It is fascinating stuff. One of the things that I find most interesting is to learn about cultures and their behaviors through their history, as you can see, their geography, their belief systems. They do play a very important part. And then with that knowledge under your belt, we can say, how do you develop the competence? At the moment, it's all been academic learning, or it's been learning, but it's learning that you link with something practical. But now we need to understand, how do you become this global knowledge economy talent that can navigate different cultures around the world with confidence and understanding? So let me show you. What is important to us at SKEMA is to develop a kind of global mindset that will help you develop qualities and competencies to navigate these different cultural backgrounds, these different environments. And as you can see from the graphic on the right, which was developed by Mansoor Javidam of Thunderbird School in the United States. A lot of these tools and models have been developed by many people around the world, but you can see that the multicultural element is very present in very many of the 3 segments. If you're going to go international, you do have to have a quest of adventure. You've got to want to go out there. You need to be self-assured. You've got to have that confidence, but you've also got to have a passion for diversity, cultural diversity, meeting different people from different parts of the world, understanding the differences and similarities between you. You've got to be able to empathize with them. You've got to be able to say, okay, I understand where that person's coming from. Not sympathize, but be able to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, from their perspective, this is right. From my perspective, it's not the same thing. Being interpersonal with impact is crucial, and to have diplomatic skills in how you express yourself is too. And you will find that these things are red threads that will help you, whether you do finance or marketing or project management. They are very, very core to absolutely everything you might do in the future. Now, you may be somebody who doesn't have a quest for adventure by going abroad. That's fine. But you know, I think in today's world already, and even more in tomorrow's world, people will be working with each other across cultures, even if they never leave home. And so these skills are important across the board and for absolutely everybody. So how do you go about it? Well, I've taught courses for many years, and I've had many discussions with my students about some of the things that they feel that they have learned on their multicultural journey, and that has become part of their toolkit to actually be successful regardless of where they go. And so these are some of their feedbacks in terms of their learnings, both in class and also on their semesters abroad. And isn't it lovely? The cultural iceberg always comes up as being one of those memorable things that people, because it's visual, because it kind of makes it easy that you link what you can see and you try to understand what you can't see. They also said that it was important to learn all the time, in class, by themselves, to talk to others. Also, and this was interesting, was you should just ask others about how they see your culture. Any conversation will give you input on understanding yourself, understanding others, just by the kind of questions they ask. Now, what you'll notice is there is a lot of observe without judging, which is difficult. You really do. Sometimes my advice would be take a step back in your head before you judge something. Take a step back to see if there is not some reason for that behavior or for that fact. And there's a lot of respecting and recognizing of differences. This is a really interesting one, and it's not necessarily an easy one because, you know, respecting differences, the differences might be completely fundamentally different to your own belief system. And you do have to respect them even if you don't like them, because it makes sense in another culture. Okay. Now, one of the things that's really difficult for most people is also to actually leave their comfort zone. And I've had many conversations with students who've said, you know, the best thing was to just strike up a conversation with somebody in class with whom I'd never spoken, and to or to go out for drinks with people that they didn't know. And they found that those were very, very rewarding experiences that helped build their own awareness, but also helped them to make friends. And making friends with people from other cultures is something that research has shown is the best way to grow your cultural competence and your multicultural skills. Not just friends for a week or so and on Facebook, but sustained friendships where you can ask people about their lifestyle, where you're sharing with them in their lifestyles, you discuss differences of opinions, all sorts of things. But research has actually shown that that is the best way to enhance your intercultural competence. And this is something, of course, that you would benefit from at SKEMA at many levels. on our campuses. But also within your programs, you will see that as you progress through the school, you will be in classes with students from different nationalities all over the world and different cultural backgrounds. And that is such a wealth. Now, I, at the front of the classroom, have always noticed that that wealth is also shown in the work, because people develop new ideas because they exchange with each other and they see things differently. And it actually provides much better ideas, newer ideas. So it's positively explosive. And finally, asking questions and listening actively are the skills that are also very helpful. There is not really such a thing as a stupid question. If there's something that you don't know, find a way of asking. You know, this is how you learn. And I found that by listening actively, I would learn much about American culture, French culture, just by listening to how people said things, how they express themselves, how that might be different in different settings. So observing and listening actively is very helpful. And, you know, so there's a lot of pink bubbles to move through and red bubbles, but in the end, you get to something really quite great. In the end, you will find that you do have a different perspective. And in a global context, this is really important. Look at this staircase. It looks, well, it doesn't look too easy to climb up or down. Well, a different perspective may actually give you different ways of navigating that staircase. So your perspectives will shift, your understandings will shift and develop. You will also develop this ability to see the slight subtleties between cultures. Now, HSBC is a bank that prides itself on being a global bank managing locally. And that's very much what our future is all about. And for a number of years, they had commercials that played very much on this, that, you know, we are global, but we understand the local aspects. And I think this is a beautiful expression of it. And also, you will be able to understand that the same thing may mean different things in different cultures, which means that really judgment is something that needs to be held in check as much as possible. It's the same car, but depending on where you are, it will have very, very different connotations and value systems associated with it. And global knowledge economy talents are able to do this. They are able to move beyond the local and the global and to become global. Now, I love this Kit Kat bar. Kit Kat is known as a chocolate bar for many of us, but the global adaptation is to have a matcha tea bar for Japanese consumers. So you have the same brand, you have the same logo, but you have a different product that is appealing to the company, obviously for reasons of sale, but also to the consumers. So it's cross-cultural knowledge that has gone into creating this product. Now, I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. I've very much enjoyed giving you this presentation. I'd just like to say that over the years, I've been very much struck by how the students are intrigued by this topic of multicultural issues, of how they are able to think deeply and critically about it. I supervise dissertations, for example, and this is just to show you how wide the net is. I've had students who've examined cultural values in different countries in terms of cosmetics, the effectiveness of cross-cultural training for expatriates, the challenge of selling cars in Indian markets and the need to adapt them, but the cultural blindness in not doing so, different attitudes towards soft power in different cultures. So it's something that really does transcend most of your curriculum in many different ways. So I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have on it. And of course, you can ask them in French and I will reply in French. So thank you very much for listening. Okay, and this is where, okay, so, merci pour cette présentation de votre expérience très multiculturelle. Est-ce qu'il y a eu une intégration plus difficile ou marquante que les autres? Marie, merci pour cette question. C'est très intéressant parce que je crois c'est toujours un challenge qu'il faut surmonter. Alors, j'ai eu des intégrations qui étaient faciles au niveau linguistique, c'est-à-dire d'aller de l'Angleterre aux États-Unis, de rentrer des États-Unis à l'Angleterre. Mais ce qui était plus difficile, c'était que j'avais vécu des expériences culturelles, par exemple aux États-Unis, ce qui me rendait compliqué la réintégration en Angleterre parce que voilà, j'avais quand même vécu quelque chose aux États-Unis. Et parce que c'était bien avant que je fasse mes études de management interculturel, je ne me suis pas vraiment aperçue de ce challenge et vraiment de ce besoin de se dire, OK, wait a minute. Je vais voir pourquoi je me sens comme ça et pourquoi c'est compliqué. Donc, il y a des intégrations où la langue, c'est difficile. Quand je suis arrivée en France, c'était compliqué parce que la langue française, c'est quelque chose que je maîtrisais, mais plutôt avec la lecture et l'écriture et pas dans un jour à jour, des échanges de jour à jour. Et il y avait beaucoup de mots que je ne connaissais pas. Mais à ce moment-là, j'avais quand même fait mes études. Donc, voilà, j'avais quand même une expérience interculturelle déjà. Je savais que ça allait devenir un peu compliqué, mais je ne le savais pas bien à l'avance ce qui allait être compliqué. Ce qui m'a aidé, c'était vraiment d'essayer de m'informer auprès de personnes, de poser des questions, etc. Alors, il peut y avoir des intégrations qui sont plus difficiles parce que de temps en temps, on se dit « Ah, je vais de l'Allemagne en France. C'est facile, on est en Europe, on est des voisins. » Et en fait, ça, c'est des intégrations compliquées parce qu'en fait, on a cette problématique de la similitude. On est en Europe, on est tous européens, les cultures européennes, c'est un peu la même chose. Ça, c'est le grand défi parce que, vous savez, j'ai fait beaucoup de formations d'entreprise à travers les années sur le travail franco-allemand. Et ouais, on est voisins, mais avec des cultures complètement différentes. Et donc, ça, c'était difficile parce qu'on se dit, finalement, il ne va pas y avoir grande différence d'aller en Allemagne et en Chine. Ça va être difficile, mais Allemagne, France, pas du tout. Et en fait, ça devient plus compliqué parce qu'on pense que ça va être facile. Voilà. Alors, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien répondu à votre question, mais voilà. Alors, c'est très différent. Ce qui est marquant, c'est, ouais, on ne sait jamais les fautes qu'on fait, mais on les connaît après. Je pensais aussi qu'aller aux États-Unis allait être facile parce que finalement, on parle anglais, hein, mais voilà, la manière de travailler, de vivre était complètement différente. Donc, ils sont tous marquants, mais de manière différente. Voilà. Est-ce que ça répond à votre question? J'espère que oui. Et il y a une autre question de Lucas. Attendez, en essayant de s'intégrer dans une nouvelle culture, est-ce qu'on doit renoncer à une partie de notre culture ou est-ce que cela peut être complémentaire? C'est une très, très bonne question. Parce que, en fait, c'est vrai. Parce qu'on pense que, voilà, il faut renoncer à quelque chose. Ça, c'est une question très personnelle. il n'y a pas de recette magique pour dire ah oui, ça vous ne pouvez pas garder, voilà, parce que dans cette culture-là, ça ne marche pas. C'est là où vous devez être vraiment conscient de qui vous êtes pour dire ok, je n'ai peut-être pas besoin de cela maintenant, mais ça fait partie de mes valeurs. Et je crois aussi beaucoup est lié avec vos valeurs et votre personnalité. Si quelque chose est très important pour vous, vous allez trouver un moyen de garder ce qui pour vous est important. Moi, je ne sais pas si on peut renoncer, en fait, parce que culturellement, c'est très, très profond. De renoncer, c'est difficile, voire impossible. Et aussi, ça ne vous rendrait pas heureux. Parce que si vous devez renoncer à quelque chose qui vous tient à cœur, vous allez être malheureux. Par contre, ce qui pourrait arriver, c'est que vous allez vous dire « Ah, waouh, là, ils font des choses que moi, je n'ai jamais considérées et peut-être c'est pas plus mauvais que ça. » Et que vous ajoutez à votre culture personnelle des choses que vous avez vécues ou vous avez expérimentées dans cette nouvelle culture. Donc, c'est quelque chose où je crois qu'il faut de la flexibilité et de gérer votre culture, ne pas forcément renoncer, mais de gérer comment vous allez garder ces parties-là et comment vous allez les adapter peut-être. Est-ce que cela a répondu à votre question? Et est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Non, pour le moment. Alors moi, je vous dis que pour moi, le multiculturel, comme je vous ai dit au début, hein, le multiculturel, c'est quelque chose qui m'a accompagnée à travers ma vie. Ça n'a pas toujours été facile, mais ça a toujours été une aventure. Et si vous le voyez comme une aventure positive, pour vous, dans ce monde vraiment globalisé, ça vous aide beaucoup et c'est une richesse énorme. J'ai rencontré, et surtout à SKEMA, des étudiants de partout dans le monde qui m'ont appris tellement de choses. C'est à travers SKEMA que vraiment j'ai découvert la culture chinoise et c'est quelque chose d'énorme d'apprendre des étudiants qui viennent de ces pays-là aussi. Et ça, c'est aussi une force de notre école que vous êtes en face d'étudiants qui viennent d'autres parties du monde. Dans mes cours, je fais travailler ensemble les étudiants dans des groupes multiculturels. Ils savent que ce n'est pas forcément facile, ça ils le savent, mais on leur donne un peu des outils pour mieux faire et c'est vrai, ils ont des découvertes même entre eux sur les cultures de chacun que ça devient vraiment une expérience très très profonde. Voilà. Donc, je vous souhaite une bonne aventure multiculturelle à vous aussi. Et s'il y a d'autres questions? Ah oui. Merci beaucoup et je vous souhaite une très bonne fin de journée et j'espère à bientôt. Merci, au revoir.